With my own eyes, I saw my husband, Brian, cutting the brake line on my car. I pretended not to know and lent the car to my sister-in-law. An hour later, Brian received a call from the police. News that his car had plunged into a ravine. The two women inside were killed instantly. They were his mother and his sister. Brian was utterly destroyed. Welcome to your choices. The cool early summer breeze slipping through the window slit carried the distinctive evening air of Los Angeles. I stood in the kitchen, stirring a beef stew that simmered slowly in a pot. The rich aroma of herbs and savory broth filled the air, but my heart felt no warmth. The clock on the wall showed it was evening. The dining table was neatly set, complete with plates and silverware. But the head of this household, my husband, had yet to show his face. My name is Amelia, a name my parents gave me in the hope that I would live a calm and wise life. My father was a well-known entrepreneur in the tech industry. My mother came from a respected old money family in Boston. Since childhood, I was raised to be a good and devoted wife. Despite growing up in luxury, I was never arrogant. This year, I turned 32. An age people say is the peak of a woman's maturity. Yet, why did I feel like a candle in the wind, steadily dimming? Brian, my husband, only came home when the short hand of the clock pointed to 8. From the driveway, the roar of a car engine was cut off harshly. It was followed by heavy footsteps and the pungent smell of alcohol that entered the house before he did. Brian came from a poor family. He grew up in a small town in the Rust Belt, where his parents struggled year-round just to make ends meet. When I said I would marry him, my father heaved a long sigh and my mother shed tears. They worried the marriage was unequal and that the difference in lifestyle would destroy our love. But at the time, I believed in Brian's tenacity and spirit. I was wrong. More accurately, I was too naive to believe that a wife's love could change a man's greed. "You're home, honey. Go clean up, then we can eat. I made your favorite beef stew, but it's probably cold by now." I offered him a warm towel while speaking gently. Brian roughly swatted my hand away. He staggered and collapsed onto the sofa, loosening the expensive tie I had picked out for him last week. "Eat what? All you do at home is cook. You have no idea how hard I work out there. If I don't drink with clients, deals fall through. If I drink, I come home to a nagging wife. You women only know the good life." I swallowed the words that were already on my tongue and held my breath. The good life. After we married, all the capital for his business came from my parents. The logistics company he led as CEO was only established because my father co-signed the bank loan. I, who was always called a rich girl, never once shirked hard work after getting married. From doing laundry and preparing meals to caring for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, I did it all perfectly. Just then, Wendy, my mother-in-law, came down from the second floor. She was over 60, with a sturdy build and sharp eyes that always seemed to be scanning people. She glanced at the cold dinner table, then looked at me with a gaze as sharp as a knife. "My son Brian works so hard. He comes home not to sweet words, but to questions about food. A woman at home can't even maintain a warm atmosphere. No wonder her husband doesn't want to come home. You rich kids are useless at household chores." After she finished speaking, Wendy approached her son, her tone changing to one of cloying sweetness. "My dear boy, you must be so tired. Do you want me to make you some warm honey water to freshen you up? My poor son works so hard to support this house, and to support that parasite." The word parasite felt like a slap across my face. I was the chief financial officer of the company. I handled all the books, so Brian could focus on outside operations. The living expenses in this house, the utility bills, my mother-in-law's medical costs, even the price of my sister-in-law Rachel's cosmetics, I covered them all with dividends from my personal stock portfolio. Yet in their eyes, I was just a parasite. I lowered my head and cleared the dining table in silence. I didn't argue. My mother once taught me, "If you are patient once, 9 problems will solve themselves." Besides, as a daughter-in-law in a family that worshipped its son, I knew the more I talked, the more I would be at a disadvantage. I reheated the stew and placed a portion on a plate, telling myself to be patient. Maybe Brian was just talking nonsense because he was drunk, and his mother spoke harshly out of pity for her son. Dinner proceeded in a suffocating silence. Brian only ate a few bites due to the alcohol, then put down his spoon. He was busy with his phone, texting someone while smiling to himself. My woman's intuition told me something was wrong. Lately, Brian had changed his phone's password. He was coming home later and later, and there were many unexplained expenses from the company funds. If I asked, he would get angry and say it was for entertaining clients. While we were eating, Rachel, my spoiled sister-in-law, pushed the door open and entered. Rachel was 5 years younger than Brian. Her appearance was always flashy, with heavy makeup and a cheap, overpowering perfume that defeated the aroma of the food. "Sis, got any cash? Lend me $2. My friends are inviting me to a spa weekend in Big Bear, but my credit card is maxed out," Rachel said without any preamble. I looked up and said gently, "Rachel, I already gave you $2,000 at the beginning of the month. It's only the middle of the month. How is it gone already? Brian's business is having a tough time too. How about we try to be a little more frugal?" Rachel pouted and whined to Brian. "Brian, look, Amelia is so stingy. Her family's loaded. Why is she so petty about a few $1,000s with her own sister-in-law? You got a rich wife, but your sister gets nothing out of it." Brian, who was busy texting, looked up at his sister's words and glared at me. "Just give her the money. She's young. She needs to socialize. Who knows, maybe she'll make good connections. Don't bring your stingy habits into this house. Give it to her." My husband's words felt like the last drop that made the glass overflow. I quietly got up, went into the bedroom, took $2,100 bills from my wallet, and gave them to Rachel. Without a word of thanks, she snatched the money, stuffed it into her purse, then happily sat down at the table and took a bite of a bread roll. "Now, this is more like it. I'm going out to play. Not eating at home tonight." Rachel left. Wendy also put down her spoon, got up, and left me alone at the cold dining table. I stared at the food on my plate. It was a perfect stew. But why did it taste so bitter as I swallowed? I looked at Brian, the man I once loved so much. Why did he feel so alien now? He was sitting there, but his soul was somewhere else. I couldn't sleep that night. Brian snored beside me, the smell of alcohol still emanating from him. I quietly turned over and looked out the window. The dim moonlight filtered through the leaves, illuminating our spacious but cold bedroom. I remembered my father's words on my wedding day. "Marriage is a gamble, sweetheart. Having a lucky partner is better than one who is merely smart and handsome." Had my luck run out, or was this karma from a past life? But my name is Amelia. I am not one to give up easily. I still believed that if I lived righteously, God would help me. I just didn't know that the storm wasn't coming from outside, but was smoldering quietly under the roof of this very house. And the one who lit the fire was none other than my own husband. A bad feeling crept into my heart, signaling that a great storm was about to come and sweep away everything I had painstakingly built. The night was silent. The sound of crickets from the garden made the atmosphere even quieter. The digital clock on the bedside table showed 3:15 a.m. I woke up with a start from a nightmare. In the dream, I was driving on a steep, foggy mountain road. My car's brakes failed, and it plunged into a deep ravine. Cold sweat drenched my body. My heart was pounding. I glanced at Brian's side of the bed. It was empty, his blanket cold. Where had he gone at this hour? Maybe to the kitchen for water or to smoke on the balcony, as usual. I tried to go back to sleep, but my throat felt dry. Finally, I got up. I put on my slippers and walked out of the room very slowly so as not to wake my mother-in-law in the next room. The large house was pitch black. Only the dim light from the street lamps entered through the glass windows. As I went down the stairs to get water from the kitchen, I saw a sliver of light from the gap under the garage door. Our garage was slightly detached from the main house, but there was access from the kitchen. Who was in the garage at this hour? A burglar? My heart pounded. Lately, there had been a few burglaries in our neighborhood. I hid behind the cold marble wall, holding my breath to observe the situation. I didn't dare turn on the light, afraid of startling the thief. My hand trembled as I reached into my pajama pocket. Luckily, I had a habit of always carrying my phone. I opened the security camera app. Our house was fitted with cameras in various corners, including the garage, to monitor our expensive cars. One of them was a white Mercedes-Benz, a wedding gift from my father, a car I cherished dearly. The phone screen lit up thanks to the infrared mode. The image inside the garage was clear, and I almost dropped my phone. The figure on the screen was not a thief, but Brian. My husband was still wearing his pajamas, but there was no trace of his drunkenness from last night. His face was completely sober. Under the garage's fluorescent light, his expression looked terrifying, cold and cruel. He was doing something underneath my Mercedes. In his hand was a shiny metal object. When I zoomed in, it was a small cutter. What was Brian doing? This wasn't a car repair. Who repairs a car at 3 in the morning, alone and stealthily, like a thief in his own house? I held my breath. Every nerve in my body was tense as I stared at the screen. Brian shone his phone's flashlight on the wheel area, then inserted the cutter into the inner part of the car, where the brake fluid line was. Click. Although I was watching without sound, I could almost hear the clean snap of metal in my head. Brian had just cut my car's brake line. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a scream that almost escaped. My legs went weak. I had to lean fully against the wall to stay upright. Why? Why was he doing this? I was planning to use this car tomorrow to go out of town, to meet a client to sign a supply contract for construction materials, a long journey that involved the freeway and steep mountain roads. If the brakes failed, a chill ran from my spine to my very marrow. Brian wanted to kill me. The husband I had lived with for years, whom I had supported with my youth and my money, was now planning to secretly take my life. On the screen, after his heinous act, Brian carefully wiped his fingerprints from the car's body with a towel, then rechecked with his flashlight to ensure no traces were left. He stood up, his face showing satisfaction and a cruel smile playing on his lips. That smile was so different from the fawning face he put on for my father, or the annoyed one he showed me every day. This was his true face, a devil in human form. I saw him turn off the garage light and start walking towards the kitchen. I panicked. I couldn't face him now. If he knew I had seen everything, he might kill me on the spot to silence me. The survival instinct took over. I took off my slippers and ran barefoot up the stairs, trying not to make a sound. I jumped into bed, pulling the covers over my head. My heart felt like it was about to explode. A few seconds after I lay down, the bedroom door opened. I heard Brian's quiet footsteps. He stood by the bed for a long time. I squeezed my eyes shut, pretending to be fast asleep, regulating my breathing to be steady. I could feel his gaze piercing through me, like a killer's gaze on his victim before the execution. He leaned down. I could feel his breath on my face. I fought back the nausea and overwhelming fear to keep my body from trembling. "Sleep well, darling. You have a long trip tomorrow." "Get a good night's rest," he whispered. His voice was soft, yet it contained all the evil in the world. Then he lay down beside me, pulled up the covers, and within a few minutes, his regular snores returned. He could sleep. After just plotting his wife's death, he could sleep soundly, as if nothing had happened. My tears broke, soaking the pillow. I couldn't cry out loud, just let the tears flow inward. Pain, shock, anger, and 1,000 questions swirled in my head. Was it for money? Was it for the young mistress I had heard rumors about? Or was it because of the twisted pride of a low-class man who had to live in the shadow of his wife's family? I stared at the dark ceiling with open eyes. The darkness of sin enveloped this room, enveloped the marriage I had considered a peaceful sanctuary. Tonight was the longest night of my life. I knew that from this moment on, the naive woman who loved her husband was dead. All that remained was a deeply wounded woman with the fire of hatred and a strong will to survive. I had to live. I had to unmask him. But how? While he lay right beside me. Dawn broke. The pale morning light pierced through the gaps in the curtains, but the chill in my heart did not subside. I had lain stiff as a stone all night next to my treacherous husband, meticulously planning my next move. When Brian stirred and woke up, I had been awake for a long time, combing my hair in front of the vanity. The mirror reflected my pale, haggard face, but my eyes shone with a strange resolve. I applied red lipstick to cover my pallor, took a deep breath, and put on a mask of calm. "You're up early," Brian said in a hoarse voice, stretching. His demeanor was normal, as if last night's events never happened. I turned and smiled faintly. "Well, I have that meeting in Big Bear today, honey. I need to get an early start." I deliberately mentioned the business trip, glancing quickly to see his reaction. Sure enough, the corner of his lip twitched and a cunning glint flashed in his eyes, but he quickly covered it with pretense. "Oh, right, I forgot. It's a long drive. Be careful, okay? How's the car? Want me to take it to the shop for a checkup?" His question sent a shiver down my spine. Was he testing me, or just playing the part of a caring husband to cover his crime? He knew perfectly well that he had cut the brake line last night, yet he dared to say those words. His audacity was beyond my imagination. The car was just serviced last month, so no need to worry. I tried to keep my voice as normal as possible while straightening my clothes. "I'll go down and get breakfast started." My mother-in-law was already awake, praying in the small prayer nook in the corner of the family room. The rhythmic sound of her rosary beads was somehow mournful. All year, she performed her religious duties and read the scripture, but her mouth uttered prayers while her heart held a knife. She prayed for peace in this house. But did she know that her own son was destroying this family? I placed a bowl of warm beef stew in front of Brian. He ate heartily, occasionally praising it. "Your stew really is the best, better than any restaurant's." I watched him eat, my stomach churning. This might be the last stew I ever cooked for him as a wife. I wanted to flip this table. I wanted to scream in his face. "Why are you so cruel?" I wanted to show him last night's video and throw him in jail immediately. But my common sense held me back. If I exposed his crime now, he would surely deny it. He would say he was just checking the car, or, at worst, admit to property damage. With his family's influence back in his hometown and his cunning, he could get off free or with just a light sentence. I needed stronger proof. I had to make him reveal his true self as a greedy, cowardly murderer. Furthermore, I had to protect my parents' assets and the family's good name. A messy divorce, where the husband tried to kill the wife, would be a scandal and a heavy blow to my parents, who both had heart conditions. I had to be patient. A gentleman's revenge can wait 10 years, let alone that of a betrayed woman. I quickly wiped away a tear that was about to fall and pretended to get more vegetables. "Amelia! Hey, Amelia!" From outside came Rachel's shrill voice. So early in the morning, and my sister-in-law was already here to cause a commotion. Rachel pushed the door open. She was wearing a short dress and carrying a small luxury bag. "Sis, getting ready for work? Good. I'm not too late." Rachel approached the dining table, snatched a piece of meat from Brian's bowl, and popped it into her mouth. "What is it, Rachel? What's so urgent this early?" I asked, my voice unable to hide my weariness. Rachel swallowed the meat and smiled broadly. "Well, my friends are inviting me on a healing trip to Big Bear for some photo shoots. They're all bringing nice cars. It would be so embarrassing if I showed up in an Uber. Sis, can I borrow your white Mercedes? Just for a few days, so I can show off a little." I was stunned. Borrow the car? The car whose brakes had been sabotaged? My heart pounded. A dark thought crossed my mind. If I lent the car to Rachel, she would be the one in danger. Not me. Rachel was no saint either. She had often extorted money from me, bad-mouthed me to my mother-in-law, and instigated Brian to be harsh with me. If she got hurt, it would be a fitting punishment. But my conscience, raised on good principles, immediately slapped me back to reality. No, I couldn't do that. As bad as Rachel was, she was still a human being. I couldn't become a murderer. Not directly. I couldn't be as cruel as Brian. I mustn't dirty my hands. I opened my mouth to refuse. I would say the car was broken, or that I had an urgent matter and had to use it. But before I could speak, Brian put down his spoon. His face changed. "Don't." Brian's shout startled me, Rachel, and even my mother-in-law. Rachel was confused. "Why not, Brian? That's weird. It's Amelia's car, not yours. Why are you the one forbidding it? Amelia hasn't even said anything." Brian panicked. His forehead started to sweat. He knew full well that the car was now a moving coffin. He wanted to kill his wife, not his own sister. Amelia is using that car today. She's going on a long trip. Important business. If you want to borrow a car, use my pickup truck, Brian stammered, scrambling for an excuse. Rachel whined like a child. You, no way I'm riding in that smelly old truck. I'm wearing a skirt. How would I even get in? Besides, you have to drive a cool car to Big Bear to get good pictures. If Amelia has business, she can use a company car or call a cab. There are plenty of options, right, sis? You love your sister-in-law the most. Please let me borrow it? I'll bring it right back tomorrow afternoon. Rachel pleaded with me, batting her eyelashes. My mother-in-law chimed in. Amelia, just do what your sister-in-law says. What's the big deal? You can use any car. As the daughter-in-law here, you need to give way to your sister. Let her show off a little to her friends. Just lend her the car. I was at a crossroads. On one side was my conscience. On the other was an opportunity to make Brian expose himself, or at least make him feel fear. I looked at Brian. His face was pale. His eyes pleaded with me, but his mouth was clamped shut, unable to speak the truth. If he said the car was broken, he would have to explain why, and the cut brake line would be discovered. A tense silence fell over the dining table. I looked deeply into the eyes of Rachel, my mother-in-law, and Brian. At that moment, I realized my husband's extraordinary cowardice. He had the courage to kill, but lacked the courage to confess, to save his own sister. All right, I said in a cold voice. If Rachel wants to use it, she can. Brian shot to his feet. His chair fell backward. Amelia, are you crazy? You have to go to Big Bear today. I smiled a thin, contemptuous smile. I'm not feeling well. I don't think I'll go. I'll just have the company driver go in my place. If Rachel wants to use it, just take it. I was gambling. I was betting on whether Brian had the courage to stop his sister by any means necessary. Betting on whether the last shred of conscience he had for his own flesh and blood could overcome his fear of being exposed. And deep in my heart, I prayed to God that Rachel would be safe, or that the car would break down before it even left the gate. Rachel shrieked with joy and ran to get the car key. Thank you, sweet Amelia. You're the best. Brian was frozen in place. His hands were clenched, his eyes red as he followed his excited sister's back. He wanted to scream, to run and snatch the key, but his feet felt glued to the floor. He was scared. Scared that if he forbade her too strongly, I would become suspicious. Scared his plan would fail. Selfishness and cowardice had paralyzed him. I turned to go up to my room, and my tears flowed again. I am not a saint, but I am not a devil either. Was my decision just now a mistake? Was I indirectly pushing Rachel into the abyss of death? But this family, this mother and son, had pushed me to this point. You reap what you sow. Fate was sealed. The car, carrying one person's life and a family's destruction, was now drawing closer. The Mercedes engine roared to life, its sound slowly fading behind the heavy iron gate. Rachel was gone. Gone with youthful spirit and arrogance, carrying a death warrant unknowingly signed by her own brother. As the gate closed, a terrifying silence enveloped the house. I hid behind the second-floor window curtains, watching the car until it became a small white dot, swallowed by the morning traffic. My chest felt tight, as if crushed. What had I just done? I had just become an assistant to the Grim Reaper. Guilt crept into my heart, but it was quickly replaced by the image of Brian's sharp, cruel face as he held the cutter in the middle of the night, cutting that brake line, extinguishing the spark of compassion that had just begun to grow. I turned and saw Brian. He was still frozen in the family room, staring blankly at the gate with a deathly pale face. His hands gripped the sofa armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He was trembling. I knew what he was thinking. He was imagining the scene of brake failure on a steep mountain road. He was imagining his sister's face. What's wrong, honey? You look so pale. Are you sick? I descended the stairs, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding. Brian jumped as if caught stealing. He turned to look at me, his eyes vacant and panicked. No, just a little dizzy. Probably from drinking too much last night, he lied, but his trembling voice gave everything away. He hastily took out his phone, dialing a number with stiff fingers. From the corner of my eye, I saw he was calling Rachel. Did he want to stop her or warn her? But how? He couldn't possibly say, Rachel, don't go. I cut the brake line. He was trapped in his own web. The number you have dialed is not available. The mechanical voice of the operator sounded emotionless. Brian went limp. His face was ashen. Rachel had a habit of blasting music while driving and tossing her phone into her bag on the back seat. Perhaps fate had blocked that signal. What is it, honey? Is something wrong with Rachel? She just left a few minutes ago, I asked, feigning ignorance while pouring him a glass of warm water. Brian took the glass, but his hand trembled so much that the water spilled. He stammered, No, I just wanted to remind her to be careful on the road. The brakes on that car, they've been feeling a bit soft lately. I looked straight into his eyes. My gaze was as cold as a sword. Soft? You said it was fine when I suggested taking it to the shop. I've been driving it and had no problems. You're just being overly worried. Brian was at a loss for words. He didn't dare look at me and quickly turned away to gulp down his water. Although the AC was set to 78 degrees, sweat beaded on his forehead. He paced anxiously in the family room, repeatedly picking up and putting down his phone. Guilt and fear gnawed at his soul with every passing second. Time moved incredibly slowly, feeling like torture. 1 hour, 2 hours, then 3 hours. It was 11 a.m. My mother-in-law came home from the market, happily showing off the fresh salmon she was going to cook to nurse her son back to health. She had no idea that at this moment, her son was finding it hard to even swallow. Brian, what's wrong today? You look so pale. Did you see a ghost? Should I call a psychic? My mother-in-law asked worriedly, touching her son's forehead. Brian irritably pushed his mother's hand away. Mom, be quiet. I'm fine. Stop fussing. My mother-in-law was shocked. Brian had always been a dutiful son, never once snapping at his mother. She turned to me with a blaming look. It must be you again, making my son upset. As a wife, you can't even manage your husband's feelings, making him so angry. I said nothing, just continued peeling vegetables. I was waiting for fate's phone call. My heart was a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing a wicked person get his comeuppance, but also fear of the terrible consequences to come. I didn't want Rachel to die, truly. I just hoped the car would break down or crash into something lightly just enough to scare Brian. But the road to Big Bear was full of steep descents. With faulty brakes, what were the chances of survival? I glanced at the clock. It was noon. If she drove fast, Rachel must have reached the Big Bear area by now. The place was notorious for its deadly curves and deep ravines. The air in the house felt suffocating, like before a storm. Brian was curled up on the corner of the sofa, his eyes glued to the news on TV. But I knew his mind was elsewhere. And then, what we were waiting for finally arrived. Brian's phone rang, shattering the silence. The ringtone, a cheesy pop song, sounded incredibly pathetic. Brian jumped, nearly dropping his phone. The screen showed an unknown number with a San Bernardino area code. Brian's face went white. He was trembling so much he couldn't press the answer button correctly. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for help, but I just sat there, watching him coldly. Hello? Brian answered in a hoarse voice. From the other end, a voice spoke quickly, and I saw Brian's eyes widen, his pupils dilating. The phone in his hand fell to the floor with a dry thud. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Then he dropped to his knees. Oh my God, Brian, my son, what's wrong? My mother-in-law screamed and ran to embrace her son. I put down the vegetable basket and approached. But unlike my mother-in-law's panic, I calmly bent down and picked up the phone. The call hadn't been disconnected. I pressed it to my ear. Hello, is this the family of the owner of a vehicle with license plate BXXXAME? This is the California Highway Patrol, San Bernardino unit. The vehicle has just been in a severe accident and has gone into a ravine. My ears were ringing. Even though I was prepared, hearing the news directly made me feel like the ground was collapsing beneath me. Rachel was really gone. And Brian, he was officially a murderer. The news came like a bolt from the blue. The once peaceful house was instantly shattered by my mother-in-law's heart-wrenching cries. She wailed, calling her daughter's name, thrashing on the cold tile floor. She didn't know the cause yet, only that the car had fallen into a ravine, but a mother's instinct had already broken her. Brian fainted for a moment, then came to, but it was the consciousness of a cornered animal. He leaped up, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, as if his blood vessels were about to burst. He ran towards the door, muttering like a madman. "No way! It can't be, Rachel." He tried to start his motorcycle to leave, but his hands and feet were trembling too much to insert the key. I had to be the pillar in this crumbling family. I called my personal driver and asked him to prepare the car immediately. I helped my mother-in-law into the car, then pushed Brian into the back seat. I sat in the front passenger seat. During the drive from Los Angeles to Big Bear, the car was filled with the smell of smelling salts and sobs. It began to rain. Heavy drops pelted the car window, sounding like the cries of a restless spirit. Brian was frozen like a stone, staring blankly out the rain-streaked window. Through the rearview mirror, I saw his hands clenched together, his nails digging into his flesh until it bled. He was suffering from the loss of his sister, perhaps, but I read a fear more terrifying than death in his eyes. It was the fear of someone who knows he is the culprit. If he hadn't been so greedy, if he hadn't planned to kill his wife for her fortune, Rachel might be enjoying a spa day or shopping right now. He had cut his own sister's lifeline. The price to pay was too high, more than his own life. I sat in the front with mixed feelings. There was a speck of pity for Rachel, but 10 times more hatred for myself. As annoying as Rachel was, she didn't deserve to die so cruelly. But then again, if it had been me in that car, if I hadn't realized Brian's plan, then I would be the one lying cold at the bottom of the ravine. And Brian would be playing the part of the grieving husband, waiting for the day to receive his inheritance. Thinking about that, my heart hardened again. This was karma. He who sows the wind will reap the whirlwind. When the car arrived at the mountain pass, it was already getting dark. The accident scene was cordoned off with police tape. In the thick fog, the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances created a grim and sorrowful scene. A section of the guardrail was destroyed, and long skid marks were visible on the wet asphalt. My mother-in-law fainted as soon as she got out of the car and saw the scene. Paramedics had to give her first aid immediately. Brian just stood there. His feet seemed rooted to the ground, not daring to approach the edge of the ravine. Detective Miller, the head of the responsible unit, approached us. He was a middle-aged man, sturdily built, with a sharp gaze that seemed to see right through you. "Good evening. Are you the victim's family?" His voice was low and authoritative. I held back my emotions and nodded. "Yes, sir. We are her brother and sister-in-law. My sister. How is my sister, sir?" Detective Miller slowly shook his head, removing his hat. His face showed sorrow. "I'm very sorry for your loss. The vehicle fell into a 150-foot ravine and hit the rocks hard. The victim died at the scene. The body has just been recovered and is being taken to the coroner's office at the county medical center for identification." Hearing the words "died at the scene," Brian collapsed onto the muddy ground. He covered his face and cried. But his crying was strange, not a roar of grief, but a whimper like someone being strangled. He was afraid to face reality, afraid to see his sister's mangled body, afraid of the accusing gaze from the spirit of the dead. Detective Miller observed Brian closely. With over 20 years of experience, he sensed something was off about the brothers' behavior. Usually, the family would be hysterical, asking about the cause, demanding to see the body. But Brian wasn't. He just cowered, avoiding the police's gaze. According to the initial investigation at the scene, Detective Miller said slowly, his eyes never leaving Brian, "There are no signs of a collision with another vehicle. From the long skid marks, it seems the driver tried to slow down but failed. It's highly likely there was a sudden brake failure on the descent." The words "brake failure" hit Brian's head like a hammer. He jumped, staring at the detective, then quickly looked down again. Despite the cold, rainy weather, cold sweat poured down his body. Brake failure? How could that be? The car was just serviced, Brian stammered. We'll confirm that with a technical examination of the vehicle. You said it was just serviced. Do you have any paperwork? Detective Miller pressed. I quickly chimed in, gently patting Brian's shoulder, feeling his body tremble. Officer, the car is mine. I'm the one who regularly takes it to the official dealership for maintenance. My husband is probably mistaken. He's too distraught. I was supposed to be the one on this trip, but my sister-in-law wanted to borrow it, so I let her. I never thought it would end like this. I trailed off, pretending to dab my eyes with a handkerchief. Detective Miller nodded, jotting something in his notebook, but his suspicious gaze hadn't faded. We had to go to the hospital to identify the body. The distance from the scene to the hospital wasn't far, but it felt like a journey to hell. Brian cowered in the corner. He was terrified. He didn't dare look at me. He knew that car was meant for me. He knew that death was meant for me. And now he must be wondering, does she know something? Did she let her borrow it on purpose? Or was it just a coincidence? The suspicion growing in a criminal's mind multiplies his fear. The county medical center's morgue was bone-chillingly cold. The sharp smell of formaldehyde made the hair on my arms stand up. Under the glaring fluorescent lights, several gurneys covered with white sheets lay silent. My mother-in-law, who had regained consciousness, insisted on seeing her daughter's face one last time. I supported her while Brian followed behind like a lost soul. When the attendant pulled back the white sheet, Rachel's face was revealed. Her eyes were closed tightly. Her pretty face, usually adorned with heavy makeup, was now pale and covered in scratches and bruises. One side of her head, crushed by the severe impact, had been neatly covered by the staff, but it couldn't hide the horror of the accident. Just this morning she was laughing cheerfully, whining for money, and dreaming of her healing photo shoot. Now her youth was forever stopped at the age of 27, at the bottom of a cold ravine. Rachel, my baby, why did you leave me? Oh God, why didn't you take me instead? My mother-in-law shrieked, clutching her daughter's cold body. The grief of a mother who has lost her child was so heartbreaking that the people around us couldn't hold back their tears. I cried too. Crying for a young life ended in vain. Crying for the cruelty of greed that brought a family to tragedy. Brian was frozen at the doorway. His hands gripped the doorframe so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He didn't dare approach, just stared at his sister from a distance. His eyes were wide with horror. In his eyes now, Rachel was no longer just a sister, but living proof that would condemn his crime even after death. He seemed to see blood flowing from the wound on Rachel's head, as if he heard Rachel's lips whisper, "Brian, why did you kill me?" He took a staggering step back, then turned and vomited violently in the hallway. He threw up everything in his stomach, throwing up the fear that was welling up from within his soul. I approached Brian, handed him a bottle of water, and patted my trembling husband's back. "Calm down, honey. It's already happened. You have to be strong to arrange your sister's funeral. Your mom keeps fainting. Right now, you're the only one we can rely on." Brian lifted his head and looked at me. His red eyes were filled with tears. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. Why? Why was I so calm? Why could I care for him so gently as if nothing had happened? My normalcy became the most abnormal thing, utterly confusing him. I brought my lips close to Brian's ear and whispered. My voice was as soft as the wind, but each word was like a knife stabbing his heart. Poor Rachel. Maybe her time was just short. It's a good thing I suddenly had a headache yesterday and didn't go. Otherwise, the one lying in there under that white sheet might have been me. You would have been even sadder then, wouldn't you? My words were like a high-voltage electric shock to Brian's mind. He froze, staring at me intently. His breath caught. He tried to search for a clue in my expression. Was I joking or insinuating something? A sudden headache. Did I know? Was it deliberate? But my face was still full of grief and innocence. There wasn't the slightest hint of hatred or victory. It was precisely this innocence that became the cruelest psychological attack. It plunged Brian into a labyrinth of doubt. He didn't know what was true and what was a lie. He couldn't ask, because to ask was to confess. He could only swallow, and it felt like 1,000 needles were piercing his throat. What are you talking about? Brian stammered weakly, avoiding my gaze. I sighed, patted his shoulder gently, then turned to discuss procedures with the hospital staff. I knew that from this moment on, Brian would never sleep soundly again. His sister's tragic death and my ambiguous words would haunt him even in his dreams. In the distance, Detective Miller was leaning against the wall. An unlit cigarette was tucked between his lips. The sharp eyes of the experienced cop were still watching us. He saw Brian's unnatural vomiting and saw him jump when I whispered to him. "Something's not right," Detective Miller muttered. He put out the cigarette, took out his phone, and called one of his subordinates. "I need a deep dive at the crash site in Big Bear. Focus on the braking system. Secure all CCTV and dashcam footage along the route the victim's car took. I suspect this was no accident. The long arm of the law reaches everywhere." Brian thought his plan was perfect, but he didn't know that every crime leaves a trace. And more importantly, he now had to face two judges, the firm hand of the law that was beginning to investigate, and the silent retribution from the conscience of a wife he had underestimated. That night, Rachel's body was transported back to a funeral home in Los Angeles. I drove closely behind the hearse through the rain. I looked at a smiling photo of Rachel on my dashboard and made a silent promise. "Rachel, forgive me for not being able to stop you, but I promise your death will not be in vain. I will make the perpetrator receive a fitting punishment so your soul can rest in peace." Meanwhile, Brian cowered in the corner of the car. His eyes were squeezed shut, but his forehead was slick with sweat. He was dreaming of a cutter and a clicking sound that echoed in the silent night. The sound that cut a brake line and also cut off any way back in his life. The funeral for Rachel was held on a drizzly day. The unseasonal rain in Los Angeles fell relentlessly, as if trying to wash away the world's dust, but unable to cleanse the black sin clinging to the hearts of the living. The usually spacious house now felt cramped with the color of white flowers and mourners. The sounds of sobs and prayers filled the funeral hall, piercing the heart of everyone present. I wore all black, standing silently beside the casket, greeting the mourners. I played my role perfectly as the wise and grieving sister-in-law. Every time someone held my hand to offer condolences, I would gently wipe away a tear and thank them in a trembling voice. Outsiders all sympathized with our family's misfortune: a sister who died young, an elderly mother who fell ill from shock, and a brother who seemed to have lost his soul. Brian sat slumped in the front pew of the funeral home, staring blankly at his sister's picture. His swollen eyes were red and stinging. He couldn't cry anymore. His tears seemed to have dried up at the morgue. Perhaps fear had frozen his tear ducts. He just stared blankly at Rachel's photo. In the picture, Rachel was smiling brightly. Her sparkling eyes seemed to look straight into her brother's face, asking, "Brian, why did you do this to me?" I observed Brian's every move. He flinched at every loud noise. He started every time a cold breeze blew out the candles on the altar. He was afraid of the dark, even afraid of the dim candlelight. Sometimes he would mutter to himself, his hands trembling so much that he spilled his coffee. A distant relative came to pay their respects and patted Brian's shoulder. "Be strong, Brian. Perhaps this was fate. You have to be strong for your mother." Brian jumped as if electrocuted, looking at the man with eyes full of suspicion and fear. He stammered, "Yes, fate. This is fate." He clung to the word fate as if it were a life raft for his drowning conscience. "Yes, this is fate. This was an accident. I didn't do it." He tried to hypnotize himself, but deep in his heart, the image of the cutter and the severed brake line kept replaying like a slow-motion film. My mother-in-law lay in bed, waking up occasionally to wail her daughter's name. I stayed by her side, feeding her porridge, cleaning her face. She still looked at me with hateful eyes, but her body was too weak to berate me anymore. "It's because of you. You're the one who lent her that car," she said in a hoarse voice. I continued to gently wipe her face, but my heart was as cold as ice. "Rest, Mom. No one wanted this accident. I'm very sad too." The night grew late. The guests had gone home, leaving only the immediate family in the quiet house. The atmosphere became eerily silent. Only the faint ticking of the clock could be heard. Brian was curled up in a corner of the room, staring blankly into space. He didn't dare to sleep, afraid that if he closed his eyes, Rachel would come to seek revenge. I brought a bowl of warm chicken soup to Brian. The aroma was savory, but to him right now, it probably just tasted like straw. Eat a little, honey, you need your strength. You haven't eaten all day, I said in a soft voice. Brian lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were red and sunken. A stubble had grown thick in just one night. He looked at the bowl of soup, then at me. His gaze was full of suspicion. Was he afraid I had put poison in it? The man who tried to kill his wife was now afraid his wife would retaliate with the same vile method. No, I'm not hungry, he said in a hoarse voice, pushing my hand away. I didn't insist. Placing the bowl calmly on the table, I sat in a chair opposite him, looking straight into his eyes. My gaze was no longer weak and submissive like before. My gaze was now deep and calm, like a lake in autumn reflecting the darkness within him. Brian, I began in a low voice. I keep thinking how much of a coincidence all of this is. On the very day I was supposed to take a long trip, the car's brakes failed, and by coincidence, Rachel was the one who borrowed it. Maybe this is a warning from God. Brian trembled. His hands gripped the armrests of the chair, sweat beaded on his forehead again. He tried to stay strong. What nonsense is this? An accident is an accident. What warning? Don't be superstitious. It's not superstition, I continued calmly. It just feels strange. People say what goes around comes around, but Rachel never did anything wrong. But who knows the human heart? Do you believe in karma? The word karma, I uttered it gently but with heavy emphasis. Brian avoided my gaze, looking down. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He wanted to scream at me to be quiet, but his throat was tight. He felt as if I was stripping him bare, seeing through to the darkest corners of his heart. That's enough. We're still in mourning. Watch your mouth, he growled, but his voice was so low that only we could hear. I stood up, smoothed my clothes, and sighed softly. Well then, get some rest. I'm going to check on your mother. Think about Rachel. They say the spirit of someone whose life is cut short can never rest. If someone did something wrong to her, she will never forgive them. I left Brian in the darkness and the fear that surrounded him. His shadow stretched long on the wall, distorted and strange, just like his soul right now. I knew tonight would be another long night for Brian. The next morning was the day of the burial. The sky was still drizzling. The funeral procession moved slowly towards the public cemetery. The hearse drove slowly, scattering flowers on the wet asphalt. I sat in the car, holding Rachel's photo, watching Brian walk ahead. He looked so thin and unsteady. After the burial, people began to leave. Brian still stood there, staring at the fresh mound of earth. The red soil still looked new. He stood there for a long time, whether he wanted to apologize or to bury the secret of his sin forever in that deep ground. I didn't know. On the way home, the air in the car was suffocating. My mother-in-law was too weak and was sent home earlier, leaving just Brian and me in the back seat. The driver was from the office. He didn't dare say a word. Brian rested his head against the car window, his eyes closed. I knew he wasn't sleeping. He was just running from reality. I took out my phone from my bag and played an old video. Not the video of him cutting the brake line, but old videos of us on vacation, laughing happily. I deliberately turned up the volume slightly. Brian's laughter echoed in the video. Sweetheart, come on, smile. I love you more than anything in the world. The sound of past happiness was so sharp amidst the current grief. Brian jolted, opened his eyes, and stared at the phone in my hand. What are you doing? Turn it off now, he shouted panickedly in a hoarse voice. I looked at him with innocent eyes. Just looking at old memories, honey. We were so happy back then, weren't we? You were so sweet and loving. Why has everything changed? Brian snatched my phone, turned it off, and threw it back into my lap. He was panting. Don't bring up the past. Are you trying to drive me crazy? I don't want you to go crazy, I said calmly, picking up my phone and putting it back in my bag. I just want you to remember who you really were. Where is the old Brian? Or has your conscience disappeared somewhere? My question didn't mention any specific event, but it sent a chill down Brian's spine. He turned his face to the window, his hand gripping the car door handle. He was afraid of me. He was really starting to be afraid of his wife. He didn't know how much I knew, what plan I was hatching. My ambiguity was more terrifying than a direct accusation. When we arrived home, we saw a police car parked in front of the gate. Brian's heart felt like it stopped. He paused, not daring to step inside. I glanced at him, saw his face turn pale. "Oh, we have guests. Let's welcome them," I said, gently pushing his back. Brian stumbled inside. In the living room sat Detective Miller and a young police officer. They were sitting calmly, drinking tea. Seeing us return, Detective Miller stood and nodded respectfully. "My condolences again. I know you're still in mourning, but there are a few things we need to confirm to complete the investigation file," Detective Miller said in a low voice, but his sharp eyes scanned Brian's face. Brian sat down, his hands clasped on his knees to hide his trembling. He took a deep breath, forcing a stiff smile. "Of course, officer. Ask anything. We'll cooperate." I sat next to him, pouring more tea for the guests. My expression was calm and appropriate, like a woman who understood the situation. I knew the real drama was just beginning. Detective Miller opened his notebook, flipping through the pages slowly. The rustling of paper was very loud in the quiet living room. He stopped on one page, lifted his head, and looked at Brian. "Mr. Peterson, according to the initial statement, the Mercedes that crashed was said to have been recently serviced. Can you remember which shop and when exactly?" Brian stammered. How could he know? I was the one who took care of the car, who took it to the shop. He only used it to show off, not caring at all about its maintenance. He looked at me, pleading for help. I chimed in gently. "Officer, our car is serviced at the official Mercedes dealership on Wilshire. The last service was exactly 2 weeks ago. I have all the receipts. I take very good care of that car. There have never been any problems." I stood up, went to a drawer, took out a folder with the car's papers, and handed the fresh service receipt to Detective Miller. He took it, examined it carefully, and nodded. "Thank you." A newly serviced car, the braking system was also normal. But it suddenly failed on a descent. "This is very strange." Detective Miller turned to look at Brian, his gaze growing sharper. "The crime scene investigation shows no signs of brake fluid leakage on the road before the location. This means the brake line ruptured or was severed suddenly at that point. Or it could have been rigged to brake at the right moment." Brian swallowed hard. His throat felt dry as if on fire. He tried to remain calm. "What do you mean, sir? Cars break down all the time. It's a machine. We never know when it will fail." "Machines can fail." Detective Miller closed his notebook, looking straight into Brian's eyes. "But our technical team found that the cut on the brake fluid line was very clean. Different from a crack due to age or natural impact, it looks like it was cut." The word "cut" dropped like a bomb in the living room. Brian's face was ashen. He felt the world spinning, wanted to deny it, wanted to scream, but his tongue was tied. "Cut?" I exclaimed, covering my mouth as if in shock. "Oh my God, how could that be? Who would do such a heinous thing? My car is always at home. It's impossible for an outsider to touch it. Unless..." I trailed off, glancing at Brian, then quickly looked down, as if I had misspoken. Detective Miller didn't miss that moment and immediately pressed. "Unless who, Mrs. Peterson? Please, tell me. This could be an important clue." I hesitated, feigning a confused expression. "Oh, nothing, sir. I just meant that only family members usually go in and out of the garage, but it's impossible for family to do it. Maybe it was a thief, or someone who dislikes our family." My words seemed to defend him, but they cornered Brian even more. Only family members usually go in and out of the garage. That night, only he and I were home. I was sound asleep, and his mother was old and frail. So, the only family member who could hold a cutter and damage the brake line was him. Detective Miller nodded, his eyes showing he was thinking hard. He turned to the young officer next to him. "Make a note. We need to check the family's CCTV footage to see if any strangers entered the garage in the 24 hours before the vehicle left." Hearing the word CCTV, Brian was struck by lightning. He remembered the camera system installed throughout the house. That night, had he turned it off? He vaguely remembered turning off the main switch in the garage before he acted. But was he sure? Or in his drunken, tense state, did he forget? Or maybe there was a camera running on a backup battery he didn't know about. His face was ashen. He quickly interjected. The camera. The camera in our garage has been broken for a long time, sir. We haven't had a chance to fix it. I turned to look at Brian, my eyes widening as if in shock. What? But honey, I already called a technician to fix it. Don't you remember? I even checked it from my phone. The picture is perfectly clear. My lie was a dagger to Brian's heart. I was pushing him into a corner. I wanted to see how he would squirm. In reality, I had copied the video to a secret USB drive and deleted the data from the system the next morning, so he wouldn't be suspicious. But now, I was casting my bait. Brian stared at me, his eyes full of hatred and fear. He realized his once submissive and gentle wife was now step by step pushing him to the brink of death. Detective Miller observed our contradictory behavior and smiled knowingly. So the camera is working normally, Mrs. Peterson. Good. We'll check the data. If no strangers entered, then the pool of suspects will be very narrow. He stood up and straightened his uniform. All right, that's enough for today. We will be back. Excuse us. The two police officers disappeared behind the gate, leaving Brian and me in the living room. The silence was so profound that the ticking of the clock was audible. Brian slowly turned to me. His face was distorted, his voice coming through clenched teeth. You want to kill me, don't you? Why did you say the camera was working? You want to see me rot in prison? I was no longer afraid or hesitant. I stood tall, looking at him with cold, sharp eyes. Brian, you're talking nonsense. If you didn't do anything, why should you be afraid of what's on the camera? Or, did you actually do something to my car? Brian was speechless. He didn't dare confess. He looked at me with eyes full of helplessness and hatred. He knew he had walked into a strong, invisible trap. A trap woven from silence, hypocrisy, and deadly sweet lies. He growled in anger, then ran out of the house, started his car, and disappeared. I watched his back and thought to myself, Run, Brian. You can't escape the net of heaven. Your punishment has only just begun. After Rachel's funeral, the already cold house became even gloomier. The rainy season passed, and the sun began to shine, but it couldn't dispel the suffocating atmosphere that enveloped our family. Brian became quiet and withdrawn after being interrogated by the police and arguing with me that day. He left early in the morning, came home late at night smelling of alcohol, and avoided me like the plague. As for me, I continued to fulfill my duties as a daughter-in-law, greeting him in the morning, preparing medicine for my mother-in-law at night. But the tree wishes for calm, yet the wind will not cease. My mother-in-law's health declined drastically after losing her daughter. She was confined to her bed, her body grew thinner, but every time she saw me, her eyes radiated hatred. She needed a target for her suffering and anger, and I became that target. One morning, I entered her room with a bowl of warm oatmeal. Just as I reached the door, I heard her groaning and cursing. Oh God, why didn't you take the one who deserved to die? Instead, you called my daughter. That jinx came into this house and brought ruin to the family. I stopped. My hand trembled so much that the bowl clinked against the spoon. I took a deep breath, buried the humiliation in my chest, and entered the room. Mom, wake up. Eat a little to get your strength back. It's still warm. My mother-in-law, who had been lying with her back to me, heard my voice and suddenly sat up, swatting the bowl from my hand to the floor. Crash! The bowl shattered into pieces. The hot oatmeal splashed onto my foot, stinging. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I don't want it. I don't need your pity. You hypocrite, my mother-in-law screamed, pointing at my face. You killed Rachel. You knew the car was broken, but you deliberately lent it to her. You were jealous of your sister-in-law. You were afraid she'd ask for money, afraid your fortune would diminish, so you killed her through someone else's hand. I was stunned. I knew my mother-in-law had disliked me since the day I married her son, but I never imagined she could be this vicious and cruel. Mom, why would you say that? My voice choked. How could I possibly harm Rachel? My car was always fine. I didn't know it was broken. You're going too far accusing me like this. Going too far? My mother-in-law snapped. You're a rich kid. You look down on us poor people. When Rachel wanted to borrow the car, you deliberately gave her a broken one so she would get into an accident. You didn't like her, did you? I know your stingy nature. The commotion brought Brian from the next room. He stood at the doorway, seeing the shattered bowl on the floor, his screaming mother, and his crying wife. What's going on, Mom? It's so early, and you're already shouting. Brian's voice sounded tired and annoyed. Seeing her son, my mother-in-law became even more dramatic, crying louder. Brian, look at what your wife is doing. She wants me to die quickly, so I won't be a burden. It wasn't enough for her to kill your sister. Now she wants to kill your mother too. Brian looked at me with a complicated expression. He knew exactly what had really happened. He knew I was not directly to blame for Rachel's death, and that he was the cause of this tragedy. But he was a coward. He didn't dare defend me. Defending me meant admitting the car was broken, and not through my fault. Besides, letting his mother hate and suspect me was a way to divert attention from himself. Just clean it up. Mom is grieving. Try to be a little more understanding. Brian uttered one indifferent sentence, then turned and left, leaving me standing among the broken pieces. I bent down, picking up the shards one by one. My tears dripped onto the floor. I cried not out of weakness, but out of pity for myself, pity for a mother's blind love, and pity for a husband's cruelty. Mom, do you know that the beloved son you're defending with all your might is the one who pushed your daughter to the bottom of that ravine? You accuse me of being a murderer, but the real murderer lives under the same roof with you, eats your cooking, and calls you Mom. My mother-in-law's cruelty only strengthened my resolve. I would not be broken. I would stand tall and watch how she would face her son when the truth came out. At the reception following Rachel's funeral, many relatives and neighbors came to pray. My mother-in-law, though exhausted, forced herself to sit in the living room. She wanted to show people how much she was suffering and used this opportunity to humiliate me in front of our relatives. After the prayer service ended, while everyone was drinking and chatting, my mother-in-law began to speak, her voice choked with sobs. Oh, our family is just so unlucky. A child raised with such difficulty dies young before she can even repay our kindness. But her death is so unnatural. Riding in a $100,000 car, how could the brakes fail? Either the car was bad, or some heartless person gave a broken car to their sister-in-law, causing her death. Her insinuating words made the living room fall silent. Curious and pitying glances were directed at me as I poured water. Whispers started. It must be the daughter-in-law she's talking about. They say rich people are stingy. Maybe it's true. Sisters-in-law are always like cats and dogs. I put the pitcher on the table and stood up straight and calm. I knew if I stayed silent now, I would be indirectly admitting to her slander. My honor, and more importantly, my parents' honor, would not allow me to bow my head. I walked to my mother-in-law, clasping my hands respectfully. Mom, and everyone here, just as Mom is grieving the loss of Rachel. She was young, our own flesh and blood, but for Mom to say I gave her a broken car is very unfair. I looked around the room, my voice was clear and steady. As you all know, that car was a wedding gift from my parents. I cared for it like it was gold, regularly taking it to the official dealership for full maintenance. I have all the receipts and documents. If anyone would like to see them, I can show you now. I was supposed to be the one on that trip, but Rachel wanted to borrow it to take pictures with her friends. I gave in because I love my sister-in-law. If I knew the car was broken, would I have dared to drive it myself? Would I have lent it to my sister at the risk of being accused of murder? I paused for a moment, looking straight into my mother-in-law's eyes, then said in a low, grief-filled voice, Mom, I have been a daughter-in-law in this house for 5 years. You and Brian know best how I've lived. Preparing meals, caring for you when you're sick, never once complaining. When it comes to money, I've never been stingy with you or Rachel. Why would you think I am so evil? I'm a human being too, Mom. I have a heart. How could I possibly harm another person's life? My sincere and logical words changed the atmosphere in the room. The whispers stopped, and some of the neighborhood ladies began to nod. Amelia has a point. Wendy, a good girl like her, from an educated family, would never do such a terrible thing. Yes, the accident was just a tragedy. Don't let your grief make you think irrational things. It's not fair to your daughter-in-law. It's Wendy who's too harsh. My mother-in-law was speechless. She had tried to use public opinion to crush me, but was instead struck back by my sincerity and sharp logic. Her face turned blue with anger, but seeing the sympathetic looks people were giving me, she could do nothing but turn her face away. Brian sat in a corner of the house, watching everything. He looked down, cold sweat beading on his temples. He was becoming afraid of me. He realized his wife was no longer a weak woman who cried silently in the kitchen. I had now become like bamboo, flexible yet strong, unbreakable by any storm. And more importantly, I stood on the side of light while he and his mother sank deeper into darkness. After the 7-day memorial, I asked for permission from my mother-in-law and Brian to go to my parents' house for a few days to calm down. Brian immediately agreed. He wanted to avoid me as much as possible. He needed time to collect himself and think of a way to deal with the police. I took a cab to my parents' house in Beverly Hills. The moment I saw my father trimming bonsai trees in the garden, I burst into tears like a small child. All the anger and suffering I had held back exploded. My father, Mr. Harrison, put down his shears and rushed to hug me. He didn't ask anything, just patted my trembling back. There, you're home with Dad now. Everything will be all right. Cry it all out. That night in my father's study, I told him everything Brian's affair, his greed, and how I saw him cut the brake line through the camera. I showed him the USB drive with the recording I had hidden. After watching it, my father's usually kind face hardened. His experienced eyes blazed with incredible anger. He slammed his fist on the table. That animal, I misjudged him and entrusted my daughter to him. Not only is he ungrateful, he's a devil with no conscience. He got up and paced back and forth. The cigarette in his hand glowed red. In his decades in the business world, my father had faced many enemies, but he had never felt such disgust, because this one was his son-in-law, the man who slept in the same bed as his daughter. Dad, I want to report him to the police immediately. Let him be punished accordingly for Rachel's death and the attempted murder of me, I said firmly. My father turned, placed his hands on my shoulders, and said after a long thought, reporting him is a must. But sweetheart, the law needs stronger evidence. This video shows him cutting the brake line, but he could argue he was just fixing the car, or that the recording was doctored. His lawyer will surely find a way out. Besides, you must take back what is rightfully yours. The assets you and our family invested in that company cannot fall into his hands. He looked at me deeply. To catch a snake, you have to strike its head. He's crazy about money, so we'll punish him with money. He wants honor, so we'll make him lose everything. Listen to me. We'll approach this from two sides. On one hand, we'll gather stronger legal evidence. On the other, we'll pressure him financially, corner him until he exposes himself. That night, my father and I re-examined all the books of the logistics company Brian managed. My father called his personal lawyer and his trusted head accountant to work in secret. With his sharp experience, my father quickly found fatal loopholes in the financial reports. Got it, my father pointed to a series of numbers. This kid is creating fictitious contracts to funnel money out. Vehicle maintenance costs, fuel, spare parts, purchases, all inflated multiple times over. And most suspiciously, 3 days ago, a sum of $2 million was transferred from the company account to a shell corporation. 3 days ago, that was the day after Rachel died. I was shocked. He was preparing an escape route. Exactly, my father nodded, his eyes sharp. He thought if his plan failed, he could run away with the money. But he's wrong. He thinks he can fool your father. Sweetheart, tomorrow, go back to your in-laws' house. Continue to play the part of the dutiful wife. From here, I will cut off his funds. Let's see how that animal writhes when he's out of money. I looked at my father, feeling safer than ever. With my father by my side, I felt like I had an army of 1,000. Brian, you made a mistake messing with this family. You thought you were the hunter, but now you'll find out you are the prey. After visiting my parents, I returned to my in-laws' house with a completely different mindset. On the surface, I remained the submissive daughter-in-law who endured my mother-in-law's scolding and my husband's coldness. But inside, I was a hunter patiently waiting for my prey to walk into the trap. My father assigned Mr. Cohen, his old friend and the family's most trusted legal advisor, to assist me secretly. We didn't meet openly, only exchanging information through encrypted emails or brief meetings at quiet cafes. That afternoon, Brian called to say he wouldn't be home for dinner because of a meeting with a client. I knew exactly where he was going. He was going to the luxury apartment he rented for his young mistress. He needed an escape, a place to restore his wounded pride and fear. But he didn't know that this carelessness was a golden opportunity for me. I sat in the home office, turned on the computer, and logged into the logistics company's internal management system with the administrator account Brian thought only he knew. He was too careless. He forgot that I was the one who built this system when the company was founded. The screen was filled with complex numbers and graphs. With my background in finance, my eyes quickly caught the anomalies in the cash flow. Brian was very cunning. He didn't withdraw large sums at once, but split them into many expense items: vehicle repairs, fuel, representation costs, gifts. All these expenses were supported by receipts and documents, looking very legal on the surface, but lies cannot cover the sky. Mr. Cohen sent me a list of partner companies that frequently received transfers from Brian. I began to check the registration numbers and addresses of these companies. Prosperity Ventures LLC, address, a small town in Ohio. I smiled faintly. I knew this address. It was the hometown of Brian's mistress. I quickly typed on the keyboard, searching for more information. The company's director, Samuel Jones. A strange name, but when I cross-referenced Mr. Jones's social security number with the data of former employees at our company, I was shocked. Mr. Jones was his mistress's uncle. How could a farmer who had only dealt with soil his whole life manage a spare parts supply company with a multi-million-dollar turnover each month? The deeper I dug, the more I was chilled by Brian's meticulousness. He had been planning this for a year. He set up a shell company in his mistress's family's name, then siphoned funds from our family company through fake contracts. And what shocked me the most was the last amount. $2 million. It was transferred on the day of Rachel's accident, under the guise of a down payment for a new fleet of trucks. Why that day? Why was he in such a hurry to move a large sum of money right after his sister died? There was only one answer. He was scared. He was afraid his crime would be exposed, afraid of being arrested. So, he prepared funds to escape. He planned to leave me, leave his old and sick mother, and live a life of luxury with his mistress using money from our family's hard work. I saved all the screenshots and electronic documents as evidence. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from anger. Brian, you are not only cruel to your wife and vile to your sister, but you are also greedy and despicable to the core. You think this $2 million will give you a life of luxury? No, that money will become the handcuffs on your wrists. I sent all the data to Mr. Cohen with an additional message. The evidence of embezzlement is sufficient. Please proceed to the next stage. Outside, dark clouds gathered, signaling a big storm was coming. But the storm in my heart had subsided, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. The next morning, Brian came home looking haggard. His clothes were wrinkled. He saw me, then looked away, and went straight up to the bedroom. He said he was tired and needed rest, but I knew he was restless. He was waiting for confirmation from the bank that his transfer had been successful. Around 10 a.m., while I was peeling fruit for my mother-in-law, Brian's phone rang nonstop. He came down from upstairs with a panicked look, phone in hand. He didn't answer immediately, but walked out to the yard, looking around before picking up. I hid behind the window, holding my breath, and listened. Hello? What? The account is frozen? How do you people work? Brian yelled into the phone, his voice breaking with anger and fear. A court order? What court? What did I do to have my account frozen? You must have made a mistake. Check again now. What? At Amelia's request? My wife? Brian went limp. His phone fell to the yard floor. He was frozen in place. His face was ashen. He slowly turned towards the house, his gaze seeming to pierce through the walls to find me. I walked out. In my hand was still a plate of peeled oranges. My face was calm as if nothing had happened. "What's wrong, honey? Why are you shouting? Your mother is sleeping," I asked in a gentle voice. Brian ran and grabbed my collar, his eyes blazing red. "You cunning bitch! What did you do to my account? How dare you freeze my assets?" I didn't flinch. I looked straight into his eyes and pushed his hand away. "Let go. You're hurting me." "Your assets? That's funny. It's our joint property. The capital came from my parents. Lately, I've seen a lot of unclear expenses, and you transferred a large sum of money without discussing it with me. As the CFO, I have the right to protect our joint assets to prevent losses. You were spying on me?" Brian growled, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. "Not spying," I said firmly, straightening my collar. "Just doing my job as a wife and a shareholder of the company. What was the $2 million for? To finance another woman or to run away?" I paused, looking at him with a gaze that seemed to see right through his heart. Brian staggered back. He understood what I was implying. He realized I knew much more than he thought. This asset freeze wasn't just to secure the money, but a warning message. A declaration of war from me. Don't talk nonsense. I transferred that money for a down payment on a vehicle contract for business expansion, he tried to argue, but his voice was weak. Buying what vehicle by transferring to Mr. Samuel Jones's company in Ohio? Buying a vehicle or laundering money? I delivered the final blow. The name Samuel Jones was like a hammer blow to Brian's head. He was shattered. He knew he was completely exposed. All his plans were in my hands. He thought I was a naive deer, but it turned out I was an experienced hunter who had set a net. He looked at me with eyes full of hatred and fear. He couldn't say anything more. He just turned with heavy steps, went out the gate, and got on his old motorcycle. As the company car had been repossessed, he sped off. I watched his back and thought to myself, "Go, Brian? Without money and power, will your mistress still be loyal? When your pockets are empty, you will see the true face of life." Brian didn't come home that day. At midnight, as the clock struck 12, there was a loud banging on the iron gate. Brian was home, but no longer in a state of fear. He was like a wounded, crazed, wild animal that had broken free. He banged on the door, shouting, "Open the door, you damn bitch! Open up! I'll kill you! Kill all of you!" I, who was sleeping in the room to look after my mother-in-law, woke up startled. My mother-in-law was also shocked and mumbled, "What's wrong? Why is Brian like that?" I calmed her down. "Mom, you stay calm in here. Lock the door. I'll go see." I went to the living room and turned on all the lights. Brian had managed to get in through a side door with a spare key, staggering. In his hand was an empty liquor bottle. His eyes were blazing red, his hair disheveled, his clothes dirty. It looked like he had fallen somewhere. The moment he saw me, he was like a bull seeing red, running and swinging the bottle. I quickly dodged. The bottle hit the wall and shattered into pieces. Glass shards flew everywhere. You're the one who cornered me. You froze my money, reported me to the police. You want to kill me, don't you?" he screamed, crying. It turned out that not only were his assets frozen, but he had also just been called in by the police again for interrogation due to the strange findings on the brake line. He was pressured from both sides. His finances were ruined, and the law was tightening its noose around his neck. And what hurt even more, when he went to his mistress for money and comfort, the woman, as soon as she found out he was bankrupt and involved in a murder case, changed her attitude and threw him out. He had lost everything: his sister, his money, his love, and soon, his freedom. Desperation had driven him mad. "Get a grip, Brian," I shouted firmly. "This is all the result of your own actions. Why blame me? Who told you to be greedy? Who told you to harm your wife and kill your sister? Look at yourself. Do you still look human? Shut up. I'm going to kill you. After I kill you, I'll kill myself." He grabbed a fruit knife from the table and ran towards me. I was terrified, backing away until I almost tripped over a chair leg. Just at that critical moment, a loud shout came from the stairs. "Stop, you ungrateful son!" It was my mother-in-law. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, trembling, leaning on her cane. She had seen everything. She saw her beloved son raise a knife to kill his wife. "Mom! Get out of the way! I have to kill this woman! She's the one who ruined my life!" Brian paused for a moment, but the hand holding the knife was still trembling. "She didn't ruin you. You ruined yourself, son," my mother-in-law sobbed, walking with difficulty towards her son. "Isn't it enough that you killed Rachel? Now you want to kill your wife too? You want to kill your mother too? Do you want to wipe out this family?" My mother-in-law's words were like a splash of ice water on Brian's face. He was stunned. His mother also knew he had killed Rachel. "Mom, what do you mean?" The knife in Brian's hand fell to the floor with a clatter. "You think your mother is old, blind, and deaf?" My mother-in-law collapsed to the floor, beating her chest. "You think I don't know what you did that night? I saw you in the garage. I thought you were fixing the car." "Oh God, my son is a murderer." The truth was out. My mother-in-law had long been suspicious, but because of a mother's blind love, she chose to stay silent, even defending him and blaming me to cover up her son's sin. But seeing her son raging out of control, her conscience as a mother finally awakened. Brian knelt before his mother, hugging her legs and crying like a small child. A cry of late regret and overwhelming despair. I looked at the mother and son, feeling a deep bitterness. This family's tragedy had reached its peak. This luxurious house now contained only ruin, torn morality, and the ever-approaching shadow of the law. From outside the gate came the sound of wailing police sirens. A neighbor who heard the commotion had called the police. Brian lifted his head, his face ashen. He knew his time was up. The sirens shattered the night silence. Their blue and red lights flooded through the windows, dancing on the white walls like avenging spirits. Brian was frozen in the middle of the living room, his face as pale as a corpse. The knife he had been holding clattered to the floor, a dry sound signifying the total ruin of an arrogant man. My mother-in-law was still slumped on the floor, clutching her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Tears streamed endlessly down her old, wrinkled face. She stared at her only son, her gaze a mixture of pain and despair. She had spoiled him for too long, and now the entire family had to bear the karma. The front door was pounded on heavily. "Police! Open up!" I glanced at Brian. He was trembling, his eyes darting wildly for an escape route. He looked at the back door, then at his mother. "Mom, let's go. We have to run. I don't want to get caught." Brian scrambled to pull his mother to her feet. "Are you crazy, Brian? Where can we run?" his mother sobbed, pushing his hand away. I walked over and opened the door. Detective Miller and two officers entered, in full uniform, their faces grim. He scanned the chaotic scene, the shattered vase, the knife on the floor, and Brian cowering in the corner. "Brian Peterson, you are under arrest for your suspected involvement in the death of Rachel Peterson," Detective Miller announced, his voice firm and authoritative. Brian recoiled until his back was against the wall. He screamed, "I didn't do anything. You have no proof. The accident was because the car was faulty. It's my wife's fault. She's the one who gave my sister a broken car. Arrest her." "Why are you arresting me?" Even at the very end, he was still cunningly trying to shift the blame to me. Detective Miller gave a cynical smile, pulling a sheet of paper from his bag. "The forensic lab results are in. The brake line on the car was not severed due to wear and tear, but was cleanly cut with a cutting tool. The cut is very recent, and we found metal traces on the line that match a specific tool we found in your garage. How do you explain that?" Brian was speechless. Cold sweat poured down his face. He stammered, I don't know. Maybe it was a burglar or someone who hates our family." "A burglar?" Detective Miller said sharply. "We've checked all the security cameras in this neighborhood. No strangers entered your property in the 24 hours before the incident. Only residents of the house." Brian stared at me with eyes full of hatred. "It was her! Amelia! She's the one who cut the brake line to harm my sister. She hated Rachel, and as the owner of the car, She could go in and out of the garage whenever she wanted. I, who had been silent, slowly stepped forward. I looked at Brian, my eyes holding no trace of love anymore, only pity for a despicable human being. Brian, you're right. Only someone from the house could have done it. And you think I don't know anything? I pulled a small black USB drive from my pajama pocket and placed it on the table in front of the detective. Officer, here is the proof. The CCTV camera in the garage wasn't broken like my husband claimed. I saved the recording from that night. I turned to Brian, my voice cold. Do you want to see yourself crawling under the car at 3 a.m. with a cutter again? Do you want to hear what you whispered in my ear when you thought I was asleep? Sleep well, darling. You have a long trip tomorrow. Remember? Hearing this, Brian collapsed as if a tree uprooted. He stared at me, his mouth agape, but no sound came out. He now understood everything. From the beginning, he had been just a puppet in my hands. I knew everything, but I waited silently for the right moment to deliver the fatal blow. You're a devil, he whimpered in despair. No, I'm a human, I replied firmly, and you are the devil who killed your sister and tried to kill your wife. Detective Miller nodded to his subordinates. 2 officers approached, pulling out gleaming handcuffs. Brian Peterson, you are under arrest. But just as the handcuffs were about to touch his wrists, Brian, with the strength of a cornered animal, suddenly lunged. He shoved a young officer, grabbed a vase from a display cabinet, and threw it at us to block the way, then ran like lightning to the back door and disappeared into the darkness. It all happened so fast. After him, he's heading for the backyard. Detective Miller shouted, drawing his pistol and giving chase. I helped my mother-in-law up. She was trembling, muttering, "Oh God, where can that boy run? He's just adding to his sins." Outside was pitch black, the backyard connected to a small alley leading to a riverbed. Brian, familiar with the area since childhood, deftly slipped through the bushes. Dogs throughout the complex started barking. Brian ran with all his might. He had no plan, only the instinct to survive. In his head, there was only one thought: go back to his hometown. There was his ancestral home, a secret underground bunker his father had once told him about. He planned to hide there and then find a way to cross into Canada. He ran to the main road and hailed a taxi that was waiting for a passenger. "To LAX. Quick, I'll pay you double," he yelled, throwing a wad of cash he had managed to grab onto the seat. The car sped off into the night. Brian huddled in the back seat, looking back, watching his house recede into the distance. Had he escaped? He breathed a sigh of relief, but his heart was still pounding. But alas, the net of heaven is vast. Detective Miller had anticipated his escape attempt. As soon as he fled, an all-points bulletin was issued to all city exits and traffic points. The taxi carrying Brian had only gone a few miles when it reached the freeway on-ramp, which was already blocked. The floodlights of police cars were blinding. A voice echoed from a loudspeaker. "Taxi ahead, pull over." Passenger inside, "Put your hands up and surrender." Brian screamed crazily at the driver, "Ram through! Ram through! I'll give you more money!" But the old driver saw the police cordon and the cocked weapons. Terrified, he slammed on the brakes, opened the door, and ran out with his hands up. "I don't know anything, sir! He forced me!" Brian was trapped in the car. In front was a roadblock, behind were police cars, and on the side, only the darkness of the fields. He was cornered. The car door was forced open. Brian was dragged out, his face pressed against the cold asphalt. Cold handcuffs snapped around his wrists. This time, there was no escape. At the same time, back at the house, I received a call from Detective Miller. "We've apprehended the suspect at the freeway on-ramp. Please come to the station tomorrow morning for a statement." I hung up and turned to my mother-in-law. She was sitting in a daze, her eyes empty. She wasn't crying anymore. Her pain had surpassed the limit of tears. In less than a month, she had lost both her children. One buried in the cold ground, the other soon to be buried in a prison cell. "Mom," I called, softly. My mother-in-law looked at me, her trembling lips moving. "Amelia, I'm so sorry. A late apology from a cruel mother-in-law. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a heavy burden. If only she had realized this sooner. If only she had taught her son to be content, this tragedy might not have happened. The next morning, in the interrogation room, Brian sat on a cold metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table. In just one night, he seemed to have aged 10 years. His hair was disheveled, his eyes swollen, his face haggard. There was no trace of his dapper, arrogant demeanor. In front of the investigator, he lowered his head and, in a low voice, confessed to all his crimes. My mother-in-law and I sat in the observation room behind a one-way mirror. My mother-in-law gripped the armrest, holding her breath every time she heard her son's confession. I had a lot of gambling debts, and I also had to support my girlfriend. My wife managed the finances tightly, so I couldn't take any money. Out of desperation, I did it, Brian confessed, in a flat, mechanical voice. Why did you choose to cut the brake line on your wife's car? The investigator asked. I wanted it to look like an accident. If Amelia died, I would be the sole heir, get all her assets and the company. I had also taken out a large life insurance policy on her. Thud. In our room, my mother-in-law fainted. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son was not only greedy but had also planned a murder for insurance money. He considered human life so cheap. And what about your sister's death? Brian covered his face and sobbed. I didn't want to kill Rachel. I swear I had no intention of killing her. That morning, she kept whining to borrow the car. I wanted to forbid her, but I was afraid Amelia would get suspicious. I thought since she was only using it for a short time, it would be okay. You gambled with your own sister's life to cover up your crime. Do you think you have any shred of humanity left? The investigator snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Brian bowed his head to the table, his shoulders shaking with sobs. I was wrong. I'm scum. Just kill me. Let me meet Rachel and apologize. Seeing this, I turned my face away and secretly wiped a tear. I cried not out of pity for him, but because of the cruelty of money. Money could turn a husband, a brother, a son, into a demon. After the interrogation was over, I helped my mother-in-law out. She couldn't walk properly, having to lean entirely on me. As we left the police station, she suddenly gripped my hand tightly and said in a trembling voice, Amelia, I was wrong. I raised my son wrong, to the point where he harmed others and destroyed himself. What face do I have to meet you and our relatives now? Take me back to my hometown. I want to spend the rest of my life repenting beside my husband's and Rachel's graves. I looked at the frail old woman before me, and a sense of pity arose. Although she had been cruel to me, she was now also a pitiful victim of this tragedy. Mom, go home and rest in your town. I will handle things here. After all, you are the grandmother of my children. Even though they haven't been born, I will not abandon you. My mother-in-law cried and hugged me tightly. The first hug from my mother-in-law after 5 years of being her daughter-in-law. But why did it feel so bitter and painful? The Los Angeles sky began to rain again. The heavy drops of the late summer rain washed the dust from the streets. But could it wash away the wounds in the hearts of those who remained? 6 months after that fateful day, Brian's first trial was held at the Los Angeles County Superior Court. It wasn't raining that day, but gray clouds covered the sky, signaling a grim day. The courtroom was packed. Besides family from both sides, there were also curious citizens and reporters covering the case. The story of a husband who tried to kill his wife but ended up killing his own sister had become big news. People came to see the face of the perpetrator, to see the price of greed and cruelty. I sat in the front row of the victim section. Beside me was my father, holding my hand tightly as if to give me strength. Across the aisle, my mother-in-law sat huddled. In half a year, her hair had turned completely white. She didn't dare to lift her head, her eyes swollen from crying too much. The defendant will rise. The judge's firm voice echoed. Brian stood up, wearing a striped prison uniform. He was bone-thin, his cheeks hollow, his eyes empty. There was no trace left of the dapper, arrogant director. He stood trembling like a dry leaf in a storm. The prosecutor began to read the indictment. Each word was like a hammer driving a nail into Brian's coffin. Premeditated murder, manslaughter, attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud, all laid bare under the light of justice. When the prosecutor detailed the act of cutting the brake line in the middle of the night, a murmur of anger rippled through the courtroom. Curses were heard from the back rows. "Animal! He deserves the death penalty!" Brian hung his head, his shoulders shaking. He didn't dare look at the photo of Rachel placed on the lawyer's table. During the examination, Brian admitted to all his crimes in a low voice. He didn't deny anything, didn't plead for leniency. He said, "I deserve to die. I killed my only sister. I am so sorry." Those late words of remorse couldn't ease the remaining suffering, but they at least showed that the last shred of his conscience had awakened. When it was my turn to give my testimony, the courtroom fell silent. I looked at Brian, then at my mother-in-law. In my heart, there was no more hatred, only an endless sadness. "Your Honor," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "the defendant is my husband, and the victim was my sister-in-law. Although the defendant has committed a heinous crime, the loss our family has suffered is already immense. For the sake of justice, I will not ask for leniency for the defendant. I only ask that Your Honor consider the condition of the defendant's elderly mother. Now, this unfilial son is the only one she has left." Brian suddenly lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes filled with shock, then blurred with tears. He never expected that at the very end, the wife he wanted to kill would be the only one to offer him a form of forgiveness. Even though it was a bitter forgiveness, he sobbed uncontrollably in the courtroom, his cries of remorse heart-wrenching. After a recess, the judge read the verdict. "Based on the applicable statutes, this court hereby sentences the defendant, Brian Peterson, to life in prison." The courtroom erupted. Life in prison. It was the last mercy, giving him a chance to repent while he lived, which meant he would have to contemplate his conscience's suffering for the rest of his life in a cold cell. It was a punishment heavier than death. Brian was led away by the officers to the transport vehicle. As he passed me and my mother-in-law, he paused for a moment. "Mom, Amelia, I'm sorry," he whispered, then bowed his head and walked quickly away. The van door slammed shut, ending the free life of a man consumed by blind ambition. My mother-in-law fainted in my arms. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing clean the dust of a long day. 3 years later, on a beautiful late summer afternoon in Los Angeles, the golden sunlight filtered through the leaves. A cool breeze touched the skin. I walked out of a tall office building, taking a deep breath of fresh air. After that incident, I rose up stronger. With my father's help, I took over and rebuilt the logistics company, renaming it Apex Logistics, with the hope of growing with integrity. The $2 million embezzled by Brian was fully recovered. Every year, I used a large portion of my profits to establish a charitable foundation called the Hope Foundation, which helps underprivileged children in rural areas and victims of traffic accidents. I believe in karma. Sowing seeds of kindness will reap good fruit. The storm that had passed had forged me into a stronger, calmer woman. I did not remarry. Although many successful men approached me, I preferred to spend my time caring for my aging parents, growing the business, and finding inner peace. Today was the 3rd anniversary of Rachel's passing. I flew to Ohio and drove to Brian's hometown. The old, dilapidated house had been renovated and was now clean and tidy. My mother-in-law was sweeping dry leaves in the yard. Seeing my car, she put down her broom and hurried to greet me. "Amelia, you came. I've been waiting for you all morning." My mother-in-law was now very old, her back hunched, but her face was no longer as harsh and hard as before. Since returning to her hometown, she had become a vegetarian, diligently practiced her faith, and went to her daughter's grave every day to pray. She lived on the monthly allowance I sent her, and more importantly, on the kindness I still showed her, the mother of the man who once tried to kill me. I placed a bouquet of fresh flowers next to Rachel's framed photo on the mantelpiece. I lit a small candle and whispered, "Rachel, I'm here. It's all over. Rest in peace. I will take care of your mother for you." Then I looked at her father's photo next to it, praying in my heart that he, in the afterlife, would watch over those who remained so they could live righteously. Dinner that night was strangely peaceful. It was just me and my mother-in-law. She served me a piece of cornbread, saying in a trembling voice, "Eat, dear. I know you like this. I'm truly grateful. If it weren't for you, this old woman would probably be just bones by now. I smiled, holding her wrinkled hand. Don't say that, Mom. We were once a family, after all. Let the past be the past. We live for today and the future. My mother-in-law nodded, her eyes glistening. She told me she had just visited Brian in prison last week. He was behaving well, even learning to make handicrafts. He sent his regards to me, hoping I would find new happiness. He said he's done a lot of reflecting in prison. Money and honor are just passing clouds. Only human affection is eternal. After dinner, I sat on the porch drinking tea, gazing at the golden fields in the distance. My heart felt incredibly peaceful. The nightmares of the past were truly gone. I realized that happiness isn't about having a lot of money or living in luxury. Happiness is being able to come home at night and sleep soundly with a clear conscience. Happiness is forgiving, letting go of hatred so the soul can be free. In the reddish twilight, a bird flew home to its nest. I sipped the fragrant jasmine tea and smiled. Life is still long and beautiful. I believe that after the rain, the earth becomes stronger, and those who live righteously will surely be blessed. Today's story ends here. If you found this story meaningful and would like to see more touching and profound stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to your favorite channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.